Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies Board of Directors, I welcome you to today's public lecture with Professor Lynn Neal. The topic of her talk tonight or this evening is Where Faith Meets Fashion. But before I introduce you to Professor Neal, I'd like to take some of your valuable time to tell you about the Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies, the sponsor for tonight's presentation. The Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies is a nonprofit research association in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan. Our organization developed from three principles. First, the academic study of Christianity is a study of the fabric of culture, no pun intended here. Christianity originated as a small Jewish sect in the ancient land of Israel, a province of Rome, as you know. The texts and traditions relating to early Christianity developed from this region are evidence of diverse practices and beliefs in Jesus of Nazareth, as expressed through interactions with cultural elements. The texts and traditions also reflect the changes as Christianity formalized and moved through different cultures around the Mediterranean and the world. The study of Christianity bears witness to the cultural developments of the last 2,000 years worldwide. Culture, particularly Western culture, though a problematic term, cannot be surmised without the formal study of Christianity. The second principle of the MCECS, that is a Michigan Center for Early Christian Studies, is that Christianity did not develop in isolation from other religious traditions. Jesus of Nazareth and his earliest followers were Jews following the God of Israel and the Torah, the laws of Moses, worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem, and participating in the festivals and holidays of Judaism. Other members were members of Roman religions and other local religious practices. The traditions of Christianity reflect the early relationships with and parting of the ways with Judaism and other traditions. Likewise, Islam embodies and reflects some traditions of Judaism and Christianity. The prophets of the New Testament are very similar to the prophets of the Quran and the Old Testament. The MCECS creates programming and supports the academic study of Christianity as a way to appreciate and increase religious and biblical literacy. The third principle of the MCECS is that Christianity is not limited to sacred texts or church history. As a foundational cultural agent, Christianity is reflected in various forms of media, art, architecture, and textiles. We are dedicated to exploring how these varied manifestations of Christianity preserve and shape Christian beliefs and practices. The MCECS is a registered 501c3 nonprofit. We support these principles by offering programs such as international conferences, publications, and lecture series, and through financial support to faculty and graduate students at the University of Michigan. Additional information about our activities is available on our website, www.mcecs.org. Please consider partnering with us to support the academic study of Christianity. And understand that when you get onto our website, it is currently under development, so it's not up to date. It will be very soon, but please understand that. Now, with regard to tonight's talk, I encourage you to use the Zoom chat function. Hopefully all of you are familiar with that. Some more familiar with it than I am. And you can use that throughout Professor Neal's talk to share your ideas and reflections. Once the talk is over, we'll move on to an open discussion using the raised hand feature to offer a question or a comment to Professor Neal, or simply enter your comment to chat, and Joshua Scott, our coordinator, will read your comments aloud. Now, a brief intro of this evening's speaker. Professor Lynn S. Neal is the Easley Professor, I hope I pronounced that right, Easley Professor of Religious Studies at Wake Forest University. Professor Neal earned her PhD in Religious Studies from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she teaches courses in American religious history, religion, and popular culture, and religious intolerance. She is the author of Romancing God, Evangelical Women, and Inspirational Fiction. She is also co-editor with John Corrigan of Religious Intolerance in America, a documentary history. I invite you to go to her webpage at Wake Forest University and to look at a complete list of her publications. Her current research examples of the intersection of religion and fashion, and that's apropos to tonight's talk. And now I present to you Professor Lynn Neal.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation to speak with you this evening. I'm really glad to be here. In recent years, I've realized that I remember my life through clothes. When I turned 5, I remember the gift of a new outfit, blue pants and a matching white top with an elephant on the front. It was Garanimals brand, which empowered children to choose their own clothes because you could match the animal logo on the pants or the shorts with the animal logo on the top. I remember my mom making me clothes, the thrill of getting to pick out the fabric, the soft velour for a hoodie that she embellished with a bunny applique that I insisted go on it, the Holly Hobby fabric that she sewed into a shirt with lace around the collar. And I am really sad you cannot see the Holly Hobby on the front of this shirt, but it was there and it matched my Holly Hobby lunchbox. As I got older, I remember my amazement that she could take fabric and make it into something useful. And more importantly, as the youngest of 4, just for me. As I got older, my mom stopped making clothes, but I still remember the dress I picked out and received for my 13th birthday. It was green with a lace-up bodice and big puffy sleeves, and it went with my big hair that did get bigger because it was the 80s. I remember clothes I wore to church as a child, the prints I wore to in college, the bomber jacket that my dad persuaded my mom that I should have, a teaching outfit I wore in grad school, my job interview suit, and I remember what I wore to my dad's funeral. Clothing is an integral part of how we live. It provides us with a way to express various identities, to perform different roles, and to mark transitions in our lives. Many of these garments stand out because they occurred on special occasions. They also speak to our backgrounds, how we were raised, what was valued. I grew up on a farm, so frugality and thrift were part of the fabric of my life. So a new outfit, whether homemade or store-bought, was indeed a special occasion, even as I got older. Clothing also highlights connections. In my case, these clothing items were important because of how they connected me to friends and with family, especially my parents. I'm not sure if everyone remembers their life this way, but I suspect most of us can recall at least an outfit or two. What you wore to your prom or your wedding, the t-shirt you got for that 5K or marathon, or maybe that special pair of Jordans that you saved up to buy. Consider for a moment, what outfits and items do you remember and why? So just as we all have our own histories filled with clothing memories and favorite garments, Christianity and fashion also have a long history characterized by special moments and important transitions. When I started studying Christianity and fashion, I'm really not sure what I expected, but I found articles on Christianity in Vogue magazine, some of them written by leading Christian figures of the day, poets, theologians, pastors. I found the language and symbols of Christianity in advertisements for clothing and makeup. I found Christianity woven into the lives and garments of famous fashion designers. So today I want to share with you some fascinating highlights in this rich history. By doing so, I hope we can cultivate a deeper appreciation for how Christianity and fashion have shaped one another and see the vital role that fashion has played in making Christianity. I had hoped to share 10 moments, but I soon realized we would be on Zoom for far too long if I did so. So as a result, I've cut the list to 5 so we can examine each of these intersections in a deeper and more meaningful way. So we're going to look at Eve, Mary, sackcloth and ashes, Christian t-shirts, and a First Communion dress. These 5 highlight a variety of historical moments, different flows of influence, and a range of ways that Christianity and fashion interact. So we'll start with number 1, Eve. In Orthodox Christianity, Eve has a troubled past. Many of you will be familiar with Genesis chapter 3 and the story of the fall in the Garden of Eden. In this garden paradise, Eve is tempted by the serpent to eat the fruit from the forbidden tree. She then tempts Adam to eat the fruit too. Once they partake, the biblical text says their eyes were opened and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. Eve does not emerge as the heroine of the story, and clothing itself is framed as a consequence of sin and disobedience. Subsequent interpretations of this text throughout Christian history have highlighted Eve's sinner status and women's seemingly problematic relationship with clothing. For example, this verse from 1 Peter highlights how it is not the outward trappings that matter, but rather the inner spiritual self that is of value. And this quote from Tertullian urges women to dress plainly, if not in mourning, due to Eve's original sin. And this one from John Wesley, centuries later, shows the enduring suspicion of fashion and the ways fashion was often framed as an impediment to living a good Christian life. What's really interesting then is the way that fashion, and specifically fashion advertisers, embraced Eve in the mid-20th century. I was surprised to find just how prevalent these Eve-themed advertisements were. The madmen of that era, the advertisers, used the story of Eve to tempt women to shop and indulge themselves with various fashion and makeup products. As you will see shortly, they utilized this idea in various ways. In some ads, the illustrations include Eve, the garden, the serpent, and of course the apple, even though we know that the biblical text never specifically identifies the fruit as an apple. Adam just isn't appearing in these ads. The ads explicitly invoke the Eve story through imagery and text, and let me show you a few examples. From 1944, this advertisement for handkerchiefs features an illustration of Eve wearing only hosiery and high heels. The serpent has wound itself around the tree and wears a top hat as it offers Eve a decorative kerchief. The promotional poem, I'm going to show you a bigger version of it here. This is what it says. The snake said to Eve in his sly little way, I tempted with apples way back in my day, but now that these kerchiefs by Kimball are handy, I find that as tempters, they surely are dandy. The promotional poem, as you can see, compares the current product, the kerchiefs, to the apple in the Garden of Eden, encouraging female shoppers to consume their products as Eve did the apple. In this 1952 advertisement for lipstick, you can see the sketch of Eve in the Garden of Eden in the background. If you look closely, you'll see a little bunny rabbit, some foliage, and then at the top, right, the bright red apple is at the top of the tree and inspires the lipstick shade below. A serpent winds its way around the lipstick case, and its tempting status is amplified by the brief text, which uses the words primeval and uninhibited. I will just add, I have looked for this lipstick case on Etsy and eBay, and I cannot find it. I wish I could. This 1967 ad for the Eve petticoat showcases the Garden of Eden and Eve's prominent place in the story. In this case, she's right in the middle of the tree, wearing the product being sold. She's situated next to the serpent and surrounded by all the apples. The text from the ad urges the consumer to be Eve, to indulge in what is being offered. It also emphasizes the tempting, not so innocent beauty of the product. Interestingly, some advertising references to Eve were more subtle and implicit than these. Rather than elaborate biblical vignettes, some ads included only an apple and maybe the language of temptation or a brief mention of Eve. In this 1952 lipstick ad, you see the bright red apple again inspires the lipstick shade. The advertising text provides a simple message: new apple bright color, tempting, luscious on your lips. No more needs to be said to make this reference to Eve and the Garden of Eden clear. From 1958, this Dorothy Gray lipstick ad highlights its bright apple red color. The text again is simple, but subtly references the Eve story by emphasizing that the lipstick, like the apple, is ripe for picking and tempting. And in these more recent ads, no text is necessary. The Vizio watch, in this case, and the Tacori jewelry are simply placed around the apples. I would add that these are just a few of many examples of many. Over and over again, advertisers courted female consumers by framing fashion as a delicious temptation and an indulgence that, as with the forbidden fruit, was likened to the rebellion of Eve. Advertisers promised that their products offered women the same self-knowledge and power that accompanied Eve's eating of the forbidden fruit. Her role as the first woman and a beautiful ideal amplified her power as a fashion role model. A few photo shoots reference Eve, such as this one from Benetton in the late 1980s, when it was known for its provocative photography. And I know of one dress, this one by Valentino, that was produced in 2014, and it features Adam and Eve. This dress was inspired by Lucas Cranach's The Elder's 16th century painting. And then you can see here in this close-up of the dress, how the designer sought to faithfully replicate the painting on and through their gown, which was featured at the Heavenly Bodies exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Mostly, though, Eve stays in the realm of fashion advertising. Her inclusion highlights a popular narrative that sees Christianity and fashion as opposing forces. And this is a narrative that fashion advertisers and designers often seek to exploit as they promote their avant-garde, boundary-pushing status. At the same time, though, it also demonstrates how elements of Christianity have been incorporated into the fashion industry for years. For Eve to be a successful advertising figure, she and her story must be known by both advertisers and by consumers. So her inclusion gives us insight into how Christianity operated as an assumed part of the fashion industry's repertoire. Thus, even as the fashion industry highlighted its rebellion against Christianity, it did so using elements of Christianity. Number 2, Eve. No, Mary, sorry. Not surprisingly then, Mary also appears in the Christianity and fashion timeline, but not in the same way. I honestly expected to see her more. There are a few references to Mary in advertisements, but they're not nearly as prominent or as numerous as Eve. However, in the 1950s, as Christianity was booming, Mary emerged as a model of how to dress modestly. Numerous Catholic Christians came together to influence how women dressed and the fashions being sold. These movements urged women to adopt demure fashions centered around Mary as a symbol of purity and chastity. The designs promoted by these groups did not feature representations of Mary. Rather, they emphasized the importance of being like Mary and dressing modestly, which often meant not wearing two-piece bathing suits, not wearing strapless dresses, and not wearing form-fitting jeans. Youth involved in these movements sponsored fashion shows that featured modest attire with high necklines, covered upper arms and midriffs, and skirts that went below the knees. The Mary-like Crusade, led by Father Bernard Kunkel, sent requests to stores urging them to sell clothing that adhered to their modesty standards, and the Mary-like tag was sold to manufacturers and retailers for 3 cents for the purpose of labeling garments that conformed to the standards. So in contrast with Eve, who symbolized rebellion and sexuality, Mary embodied purity and modesty. In garments, Mary appeared not through distinct symbols or embellishments, other than the tag, but through garments with high necklines and low hemlines. So in the modesty crusades of the 1950s, we can see how some Christians sought to influence the fashion industry. I was surprised to find then that after these movements faded away in the 1960s, Mary doesn't have a large role to play in the fashion industry. That is until the 1990s and the rise of popular Italian designers, specifically Gianni Versace and Dolce & Gabbana. Versace was one of the first designers to include representations of Christian holy figures in his designs. Prior to this time, designers avoided depictions of Mary and saints on their garments. And the reasons for this were likely to avoid undue controversy, and also because of fashion's tendency to embrace more abstract forms of art. In the early 1990s, though, Versace, like Coco Chanel before him, was inspired by the Byzantine Empire, particularly the mosaics at Ravenna. This city in northeastern Italy had been the capital of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. And I was fortunate enough to visit there about 5 years ago. It's a small city and it features numerous significant religious sites, including the Mausoleum of Galla Placida, an Arian baptistry, the Basilica of St. Apollinare Nuovo, and the Church of San Vital. These sites are famous for their beautiful mosaics, and you might be familiar with this one of the Empress Theodora, one of the most famous from San Vital. In the mosaic procession that you see here, she brings a jeweled Eucharistic chalice as an offering to God and the church. She wears a jeweled crown and collar. And interestingly, as you look at the hemline of her garment, you see 3 figures adorning that hemline, the 3 kings bearing gifts. Here in Ravenna, designers like Versace found techniques to utilize embroidery and mosaic, and an example of holy figures on garments. So while Versace is more well known for the sexuality that infused his designs, it's important to note that fashion historians and critics emphasize that he was a student of history, one who frequently visited museums and historical sites. Versace himself stated, "When you are born in a place such as Calabria, and there is beauty all around, a Roman bath, a Greek remain, you cannot help but be influenced by the classical past." Versace's designs fuse past and present, historical references, and contemporary signs. In the early 1990s, the influence of this opulent Byzantine style can be seen in Versace's designs and in the techniques used. Upon first seeing these garments, you might be surprised or shocked, but I hope you'll think about it deeply and use it as an opportunity to question our assumptions and to think more deeply. Here's some examples. These designer jeans are in keeping with Versace's embrace of bold prints and colors, but in this case, the content is infused with Byzantine references and grandeur. We see gold, jewels, crosses, different versions of the Madonna and Child. In this halter, We see the ancient techniques of mosaic making translated into elaborate beadwork. Using gems of various sizes creates a mosaic-like texture and richness. Including Mary and a cross in the garment amplify the Christian resonance of the piece. Further, the shape of the halter emphasizes Mary's presence. The bust line and halo draw your eye to the holy figure. Mary appears ancient and artistic given Versace's mosaic technique, but at the same time, she seems updated, bejeweled and sparkly. Versace's rock star version of the Madonna. The styling of this piece for the runway show paired the halter with this cross-embellished motorcycle jacket and a short skirt, which highlights this rock star kind of sensibility. Here's just one more example. It's a beaded bolero featuring Mary with a halo next to an elaborate cross and crown. And Versace also did numerous gowns featuring cross symbols. Other designers followed in the footsteps of Versace in looking to the Christian past and Mary for inspiration. The Italian design duo of Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana frequently create garments inspired by Mary. For the sake of time, I'm going to focus on one collection. This is the Spring-Summer 1998 collection. One of the first that I have found that revolves entirely around a Christian theme, that of a religious procession honoring a saint. In their framing of the collection, Dolce and Gabbana emphasized their Catholic identity. They stated, "We realized that the use of religious images in our collection could be controversial because religion is a very personal matter, which is interpreted differently by each of us. Since fashion is the way in which we express ourselves and convey our feelings, the use of religious images was used to praise the Madonna, whom we strongly believe in. We do not want to offend anyone." These claims to sincerity and authenticity were bolstered by the designs and their choice of Marian images. Unlike some designers who utilize Christian imagery to shock and provoke, the designs in this collection seem to address a search for spirituality. For example, some of the garments feature the Madonna of Work, sometimes known as Our Lady of Labor, an image of whom Domenico Dolce's father had in his own atelier. Some featured Mary holding the Christ child, and others showcased cherubic angels crowning Mary, the Queen of Heaven. Mary is faithfully replicated on a number of garments in the collection in ways that reinforce the power of devotional culture in Catholicism. This is not Versace's rockstar Madonna, but rather a delicately rendered Mary. According to one reporter, it all had a beauty and even a peculiar aura of reverence about it. Since this collection, Christian history and Marian imagery have continued to appear in several Dolce & Gabbana collections. Other designers have found it equally inspiring. However, unlike Dolce & Gabbana, a few of these designers have found themselves embroiled in controversy. How many of you have ever watched a beauty pageant? I suspect some of you. While they're not as popular as they used to be, controversy ensued at the 2015 Miss Universe pageant. Contestant Kimberly Castillo, Miss Dominican Republic, found herself at the center of a debate for her national costume, which you can see here. Castillo's dress in shades of blue and yellow, accompanied by a veil and halo-like headpiece, not only gave her a Marian appearance, but the bodice of the dress featured an image of Mary and the baby Jesus. More specifically, it featured the Virgen de la Altagracia, protector of the Dominican people. She appears on Castillo's dress in the idiom of her iconography, a reverential pose before her infant son. Some viewed the dress as a respectful homage, while others viewed it as an act of profanation. Castillo herself saw the dress and its design as honoring her faith and her country. As the protector of the nation, the Virgin symbolizes humility and represents the poor. Dress designer Lionel Lirio explained that he selected the design because Castillo hails from an area where the Virgin is housed, and he replicated the designs and techniques seen in the basilica's altarpiece. So from Mary's emergence as a modest fashion role model, to her likeness appearing on designer fashion garments, to her embodiment at a Miss Universe pageant, we can see just a few of the many and complex ways that Christianity and fashion intersect. We see Christians attempting to influence fashion, designers being inspired by Christian sites and their own relationships with Christianity, and people making sense of their religious and national identities through fashion. Even more than Eve, Mary powerfully illustrates the long-standing and varied relationship between Christianity and fashion. Number 3, sackcloth and ashes. Thus far, we've looked at different ways Christianity and fashion influence each other through specific religious figures. Here, I want to shift our focus to a different dimension and think about the Christianity-fashion relationship in another way. Historically, many groups have explicitly rejected the garments and ethos of the fashion industry. Scholars refer to this stance as oppositional dress, referring to how these groups express their dissent and distinctive ideas from the dominant majority through dress and fashion. For example, oppositional dress is often used by subcultural movements. You can think about the hippies, beats, bikers. But it's important to know that even as these groups utilize dress to critique fashion and pervasive norms, scholars Susan Kaiser and Ryan Lucen explain the dominant culture often relies upon oppositional dress of all kinds for inspiration and marketing. So the biker jacket of the streets becomes the business casual moto jacket of the office. In this way, what was once an oppositional trend is incorporated and made part of the mainstream. In terms of Christianity, the oppositional style represented by the attire of Catholic monks, nuns, and priests have often been mined as sources of inspiration by diverse fashion designers ranging from Claire McCardell to Cristobal Balenciaga, from Jean-Paul Gaultier to Calvin Klein. And here are just a few examples. This is by American designer Claire McCardell from 1949. She called it the monastic dress, influenced by influenced by the monk's robes. This one from 1967 by Cristobal Balenciaga. It's a cape and evening gown was worn by socialite Gloria Guinness in 1967 and is inspired by Catholic priest cassocks. And in 1989, this collection by Jean-Paul Gaultier, another designer that returns to Christianity and Christian themes often, was inspired by Catholic nuns' habits for at least part of this collection. However, not all forms of oppositional dress become part of mainstream fashion. And I want to share with you one such example. In the 1960s, the Children of God, now known as the Family International, mixed evangelical Protestant morality with the counterculture's critique of authority to create a youth movement dedicated to evangelism. Led by David Moses Berg, early followers traveled around the country, sharing their faith and urging the nation to repent. Apocalypticism, a belief that the end and God's judgment are imminent, infused their mission with urgency. The group sought to warn America of the impending reckoning and inspire repentance. And they found inspiration in the biblical book of Jeremiah, which highlighted the grief they felt at the nation's apostasy, as well as the reality of God's pending wrath. And they often quoted this passage: O daughter of my people, gird thee with sackcloth and wallow thyself in ashes. Make thee mourning as for an only son, most bitter lamentation, for the spoiler shall suddenly come upon us. To gain attention and make their cause known, they performed sackcloth vigils from 1969 to 1973 at symbolic sites, including the Senate building in DC and its significant events, such as the trial of the Chicago Seven. For the vigils, the children of God drew inspiration from this passage, this verse in Jeremiah, and other biblical passages to create a distinct form of religious dress that included, you can see here, a red sackcloth robe. It was made out of burlap, a yoke. You can kind of see like a wooden looking thing in the picture. That's the yoke. A rod or stave, which she's holding in her hand, a scroll, ashes on the forehead, and often an earring. The clothing, as numerous newspaper articles reported, was symbolic and significant. Occasionally, the participants would lift their staves and yell, "Woe" or "abomination," but mostly they remained silent and let their clothing and the scrolls speak for them. The red sackcloth and ashes symbolized repentance and mourning, while the yokes represented bondage and their wholesale commitment to Jesus. The scrolls featured biblical verses that warned of God's pending judgment, and participants spent hours practicing their synchronized walk and vigil performance. The creation of this attire emphasizes not only the importance of the group placed on the Bible and its incorporation into their lives through dress, but also the labor they willingly performed to make it happen. During the vigils, the children of God appeared to have stepped out of the pages of the biblical past to warn a fallen America about the wages of sin. The contrast between their primitive attire and the modernity of American city streets in the late 1960s and early 1970s was stark. It grabbed media attention with numerous newspapers running stories on the vigils. For example, in 1970, one reporter stated that they appeared like apparitions from the pages of Ezekiel and Jeremiah. They had arrived to forecast the death of a nation. For the children of God, this publicity provided a sense of opportunity and validation. In her memoir, Deborah Davis, oldest daughter of the movement's leader, recounted, "The interest shown by the news media was a great boost to our morale. Getting so much attention made us feel important, as if we actually were God's end-time prophets, confirming what my dad had been telling us." All the dress work that went into the sackcloth vigils helped the children of God embody their beliefs, which enlivened their theology and mission and the mission of the movement during its infancy. In many ways, the sackcloth and ashes worn by the children of God are distinctive. However, their example highlights the power of fashion to simultaneously do multiple things. First, distinct oppositional dress provides groups with a way to build community, a sense of belonging, a feeling of identity. Second, it provides people with a way to resist and critique pervasive societal norms. While it may not always be sackcloth, we should pay attention to the ways individuals and groups are using fashion to create different ways of living and being Christian. Number 4, Christian t-shirts. Well, while no one I know of wears sackcloth and ashes, many people I know wear t-shirts. I wear t-shirts. We probably all have a t-shirt somewhere, right? We have t-shirts for almost any cause you can imagine, and this includes Christianity. Christian t-shirts emerged in the 1970s as the American evangelical subculture began to flourish. Through Christian bookstores, evangelicals sold a range of commercial and cultural goods adapted to their theology: Christian rock music, Christian romance novels, and Christian t-shirts. And you see, often the companies, authors, or designers of these t-shirts made these products, and they emphasized how their own Christian faith and the power in these purchases could be used to evangelize others. And the content of the shirts, with references to Jesus, verses from the Bible, and other theological principles, reinforce this alignment of faith and fashion. Many of these early t-shirts combine Christianity and a popular culture item through wordplay, as you can see in this example about Reese's, and this one about Sprite. And I will just say these parodies have not gone away. A quick internet search will show you many varieties. My students recently found a whole range focused on condiments, ketchup, mustard, relish, all kind of with adapted logos for Christianity. So you can still find versions of these today. As Christian bookstores faded away, given the rise of online retail, the variety and style of evangelical Christian t-shirts has expanded. For example, the company JCLU Forever, JCLU stands for Jesus Christ Loves You, so JCLU Forever, roots itself in evangelical Christianity. The website states that its goods are created by people who love Jesus, for people who love Jesus. They take pride in being a source and destination for uplifting and inspirational apparel and goods. For them, Christianity infuses all aspects of life, from home decor to clothing choices. Their tagline is "Believe it, wear it, live it." And as you can see from these 2016 examples, I'll show you those now. These t-shirts continue to reference Bible verses and popular conservative Christian concepts, but the shirts and the styling of them is more contemporary. The products sold by JCLU Forever and other similar companies are clear and transparent in their messaging. They provide products that they hope will help their wearers express Christian identity and have productive conversations about it as they move through their daily lives. Other t-shirts, though, are more open to interpretation and raise interesting questions about the purpose of this attire and its clarity as a communication tool. For example, in the 2010s, a company called Heart OMG created a line of t-shirts and tank tops featuring Christian messages. And I'm sorry, these are a little blurry, but that is the best I could find. This says Team Jesus, just so you know. The company's website stated that they bring you a delightful mix of fun, freedom, faith, and love, and assured consumers that every single irresistible Heart OMG piece is inspired by feelings and love for Jesus through an intimate walk with God. It also explained that a portion of their profits went to support a ministry in West Africa. Everything seemed aligned with the hallmarks of evangelical identity. But some of the messages on the clothing and the appearance of the models created doubts about their evangelical Christian authenticity. Certainly, many evangelical Christian t-shirts rely on parody, but to some, Heart OMG's content seemed less parody and more double entendre. For example, a large ice cream sundae adorns one tee, while the words "Sweet Jesus" provide the caption. The shirt can be interpreted in multiple ways. It could mean that Jesus, like ice cream, is sweet, but it could also be read as an exclamation, such as "Sweet Jesus, this ice cream is delicious," or something else. Similarly, another tee shows an open tube of reddish pink lipstick, the imprint of a kiss, and the phrase "Don't be tempted." Is this an admonition to young women to avoid wearing lipstick? A warning to young men to steer clear of women wearing makeup, or something else? The lack of clarity in this messaging raised questions about the authenticity of the product and the company. The brand's scantily clad models in provocative poses amplified this questioning. Unlike other Christian t-shirt sites at the time that simply showed the t-shirt for sale or a young woman or man in said t-shirt in an unassuming pose, Heart OMG's models lounged provocatively on beds wearing their tank tops and little else while they played with their hair and flirted with the camera. In response, some evangelical gatekeepers questioned the brand's sexualized imagery and its second commandment bending name. Another condemned the brand for, quote, dishonoring God, and compared the models to, quote, hookers. Was Heart OMG an evangelical company with bad taste and bad theology, or was something else going on? Christian media consultant Phil Cook offered an alternative explanation. He proposed that Heart OMG was a secular company using church images and ideology to sell fashion. He noted that a shot of the models praying with their heads bowed and hands clasped is what people who don't know what praying in church looks like imagine what that praying in church looks like. He concluded that it was a Poe, referring to Poe's law, which states that without a clear indication of the author's intent, it is difficult or impossible to tell the difference between an expression of sincere extremism and a parody of extremism. So in some ways, Heart OMG and its products seem authentic and sincere, and in other ways, they do not. I found myself puzzling over these Heart OMG designs. Are they sincere expressions of faith, clever marketing ploys, or some combination of both? It really makes you think about how we interpret religious symbols in everyday life. And there's no definitive answer, as my attempts to interview those at the company went unanswered at the time, and now the company is defunct. Perhaps, though, this ambiguity is precisely the point. We often take for granted fashion's ability to clearly communicate a message. We wear work clothes to the office, workout clothes to the gym, gowns and tuxedos to formal events if people are going to those. And to go back to the quote by John Wesley, it is deeply ingrained in Christianity that one's outward appearance, including clothing, is an accurate reflection of one's inward spiritual state, or at least that's what's often assumed. The case of Heart OMG confronts us with a more complicated reality, that as much as fashion may reveal about someone, it can also deceive, obfuscate, and confuse. There's no way of knowing on the basis of clothing choices alone that the person wearing an I Love Jesus t-shirt actually does love Jesus, or that the person wearing the Don't Be Tempted Heart OMG tank top doesn't in fact love Jesus. This doesn't mean that fashion is superficial or trivial, but rather it means we need to more deeply consider its complexity. Fashion communicates, but not always in the clear and transparent ways that have often been assumed. And examining the history of Christianity and fashion reminds us to not make assumptions and to delve more deeply into fashion's communication possibilities. Number 5, a First Communion dress. In many ways, this First Communion dress is simple. It is handmade of eyelet fabric with a high ruffled collar and a ruffled yoke. It is long with puffy sleeves and another ruffle at the bottom. There are 2 pins on the bodice, and the sash that once went through the belt loops is missing. A simple dress, but it, like other garments, has many stories to tell. One story is that of family. This simple dress was made by a loving aunt for her niece and goddaughter, one of my best friends. And when I interviewed Gigi about the dress, she shared that her aunt was a gifted sewer who made many clothes for her when she was little. It was the late 1970s, a time when sewing was shifting from economic necessity to creative hobby. In 1974, research suggests, and this is in the US context, that 50 million women between the ages of 12 and 65 sewed. And in our rural community filled with farms and 4-H, sewing was something many women did and young girls learned. It was a skill in keeping with the frugality and industriousness valued in our small town and other small towns at the time. More than that, though, it was an activity that people, mostly women, enjoyed. And in thinking about her family, and especially her aunt, Gigi shared that sewing was a little bit of a necessity, but also a fun thing. And while my friend's memories of her first communion are overshadowed by her fainting during the Mass due to a combination of nerves and warm temperatures, she does remember going to the store to pick out the delicate feminine eyelet fabric. Such trips are a common part of First Communion preparation. Scholar Susan Ridgely explains in her study of the event, girls either went on a special shopping trip or were given their dresses by elder family members. There's these special circumstances of the selection of their dresses seem to make the details more vivid to the girls. And this was certainly the case with Gigi. And she also remembered the big family party that occurred afterward. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins traveled 5 hours to attend the Mass and celebrate this important rite of passage in the life of young Catholics. Family was also an integral part of the dress itself. The sewing of it stitched together generations of women in the family. Gigi's grandmother sewed clothes and quilted, skills that she passed down to her daughters. These family threads and skills likely explain why Gigi's aunt made this dress especially for her. It also makes sense of why Gigi's mom laundered her First Communion dress and packed it away with other clothes made by her aunt and grandmother. It's a family thread that continues with Gigi. She made her son's vest and shorts for his baptism, and as well as a bow tie for his First Communion, out of the fabric of her wedding dress. She also sews blankets for new babies in her family, some made from quilts her mom had started before she passed. In addition to family, special attire, specifically the wearing of white dresses and veils, connected communicants to the Catholic past. This sartorial tradition emerged in the 19th century, and it was influenced by French fashion magazines that showed veiled communicants arriving at the church, clutching prayer books alongside their mothers. The dresses are fashionable but plainly trimmed. At that time, communicants were adolescents, so this First Communion attire was designed for teen or almost teen girls. It was not until 1910 that Pope Pius X shifted the age of First Communion to children ages 7 or 8. This aligned with the Pope's emphasis on the importance of taking the sacrament and the theological idea that small children were in a state of grace and therefore at the perfect age to partake. Despite this change in age, the tradition of wearing white dresses and veils continued. And it continued to be a vital part of the ritual, as seen in Gigi's dress and those worn by First Communicants today. The simplicity of Gigi's homemade dress belies its complex meaning, history, and significance. Its making highlights how sewing creates threads of connection between generations of women in a family. Its wearing demonstrates the significance of Catholicism and its rituals for children and their parents. And in its details, we see the power of religious dress traditions to connect people to the past and their faith. Family, religion, and tradition are stitched together in its seams and woven into its design. Carefully preserved and tucked away in a box, this dress is not forgotten, but an important part of the fabric of memory that enlivens religious life. In conclusion, I hope that highlighting these 5 different examples in the history of Christianity and fashion has provided you with insights into some fascinating historical moments and demonstrated how much we can learn from studying them. We've gone from Eve as to designer gowns featuring Mary, to primitive sackcloth robes, to popular Christian t-shirts, to a handmade First Communion dress. These garments and others have many stories to tell about Christianity, how it has been lived, interpreted, negotiated, and debated. By taking seriously the role of fashion and clothing in religious life, we can see how, as scholar David Morgan argues, people do what they want to believe. They make belief in the things they do. Studying fashion helps us see how Christianity has been sewn together and made part of the fabric of people's lives. I want to end with an invitation. Currently, as part of my research, I'm building a website on religion and clothing, and it's entitled Fashioning Faith. It will focus on telling these important and often neglected stories by highlighting research-based analyses of garments deemed religious in some way. And as it grows, it will feature items from various traditions and different time periods. So if you have a story to share and images to share, please be in touch. Love to hear from you and for you to join me in this project. You will see my email is on this slide. And so I encourage you to reach out if you have ideas. And I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm happy to take some questions through the chat function, and which is available to you on your screens below. Thank you so very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this talk. Uh, there may be some comments coming in, but I would like to start the conversation off. As I shared beforehand, I'm teaching a course on ecology and religion. And one thing I was thinking about as you were presenting was wondering how the Christian production industry is similar or different from other industries. Does the ethics of Christianity somehow span into the production of the products that are representative? I was also wondering, I have a second question. I found it fascinating that most of your talk in some way approached the study of fashion through an ethnographic lens, through the passing on of faith through family. Could you speak to how the Christian um, textile industry is changing with the decrease in Christian population? Statistically, Christianity is shrinking. It's decreasing in amount. People are going to church less and less. And it was interesting to me also to ponder. I wonder statistically, does that mean that there's less Christian fashion being produced in this time than say maybe like 10 years ago or 30 years ago, where Christianity was more common among the American population in particular, but I guess you could also say worldwide. So those are two questions to start us off.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. The first question about Christianity, fashion, and the environment, I think is a really important one. I think widely known, I suspect that fashion is one of the a huge contributor to the environmental crisis. And you see, interesting, I follow a couple like sustainable designers on social media and such as Instagram and things like that. And just to see how much clothing waste there is, and with the rise of and the existence of fast fashion, with people just making so many clothes so quickly for every season, every holiday, it just is exponentially impacting the economy, but also the environment. I haven't focused on this specifically in my research, but the companies I have looked at in terms of those creating specifically Christian garments, I haven't seen anything specific in terms of an ecological mission. But I would encourage your students, that I know some of them are here or will watch, I think this would be a great topic for a paper or some research on this, because I think it's definitely a niche, and I'm sure there must be some. I'm not aware of who they are. So I think that's definitely a great area for further research and investigation. I would also think maybe there's some Christians that are probably promoting upcycling. So maybe they're not making the garments, but they're remaking garments, probably out of, and this is where ethnography would be important, right? To interview folks. But I imagine there are folks out there that, because of their Christian commitments, are not purchasing new fashions. They're probably thrifting, and then, or, and then recycling and upcycling those items and refreshing them through existing textiles. I imagine that that's out there. In terms of your second question, it's interesting. I haven't haven't looked at the sales, like to see if sales are down, but what I have seen in terms of the shrinking or expansion of Christian fashion, however we want to define that, is what I've seen is a growth in it. And I think that's because capitalism and commercialism, they recognize a market. So I think the difference is where in the past, in the 70s, the 80s, to find Christian t-shirts, or which really was what it was, Christian t-shirts, maybe some sweatshirts, you had to go to a Christian bookstore. You had to have one you could go to. Now, I mean, when I first moved to Winston-Salem 21 years ago, I think there were like 4 Christian bookstores. Now I know of maybe 1. They just aren't there. But what's happened is with online retail, there's an explosion of possibilities. And there are lots more retailers. Now, are they reaching more or less people? I don't know. But what I can say is there's a proliferation of goods, including fashion goods. So students in the audience, you might be familiar with the Essentials brand or Fear of God, which is founded by a Christian, but it's not specifically a Christian brand. Sorry, I'm thinking of music. They used to make this distinction in Christian music, like a Christian band or Christians in a band. We have this in fashion. So Essentials or Fear of God, the Jerry Lorenzo, the founder, he worked with Justin Bieber, and the shirts say Fear of God. And they all just seem like variations on that, like high kind of luxurious athleisure wear. But yes, there seems to be more to me, but I do think you're right. I think it speaks to, in a way, changing demographics. And I look at it is in the sense that, one, online has exploded the possibilities in terms of entrepreneurship, right? Like people can, hey, I can make t-shirts, I can make sweatshirts, things like that. I also think there's something about people, and what you see with this changing demographic and the rise of the nuns and the shrinking of religious adherence across the board, or especially in Christianity, the symbols seem to me still to be salient to people, still important, that it's a way to hold on to and these decontextualized traditions. So you might not go to church, but you might still love Jesus or something like that, right? And so how do you show that? Well, you still might wear a cross necklace or one of these sweatshirts, or have some other garment that serves as a reminder almost, or like a talisman or an amulet in that sense, like perform some religious function for you, even if it's only memory or a kind of physical reminder. Thank you for that question. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
Lynn,
to add to that, I was
go
going to say
ahead,
to add to
Joshua.
that,
Go ahead.
Buckle jeans, I know had a large line for a long time that had bling on the rear end of pants, on the back of pants,
Yeah.
that had crosses. And I think they moved away from the line because they had like jewels embedded in the jeans. And so if a person sat on a wood chair would scratch the wood.
Okay.
So it's interesting to think about how the designs themselves have changed over time.
Yeah.
It would be interesting, I think, also as you think about your inventory. I don't know. I like jeans. It'd be interesting to see what producers actually make these products still
Mhm.
as designs have changed. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's something, again, that needs, I invite more and more people to study this, because the change over time, there's just so much that
yep,
you could do.
yeah. Let's go to John and then we'll go to Jim. Sorry, John, I interrupted your
Oh,
thought here
that's all right. No,
a moment
Lynn,
ago.
I had a question as we were looking at Versace and Dolce Gabbana. Um, I thought about Madonna, the singer,
Yeah.
actress, performer, and I know that you've probably given her some thought within this context, and I just wondered what your interpretation of her might be.
That's a great question. Thank you so much. Yes, I've written about Madonna in the 1980s, especially 1984, with her performance of Like a Virgin, wearing numerous cross necklaces and rosaries. I didn't include the cross jewelry. That is certainly something I could have included as one of the, it would be in my top 10.
Yeah.
Didn't make the 5, but that is pivotal. I have a whole chapter on the cross in my book, and it starts with Madonna. But I just want to emphasize what I did in the book project, and I think this will help situate Madonna, is I was tracing, like, my question was, how did we get here, right? How did we get to the place where the Madonna and child are on a pair of jeans or on a dress? That was my whole question. Like, how did God get on a dress? Like, that's what I kept asking myself. And so that was when I was tracing this lineage or this genealogy. It was in articles, then I saw it in ads, and then the first place it was in jewelry. And when it started to shift out of the kind of text and graphics into clothing and accessories, the first thing it was the popularity of cross jewelry in the 50s and especially in the 1960s. In 1969, I think it's the New York Times, was like the ancient ancient symbol fashion fad in 69. And then we come again in the 1980s with Madonna, who, right, is this provocative, I think it's so hard to convey to audiences now, like how famous she was at the time and how provocative, right? And I think a couple of things. One, I looked a lot at her biography and the ways that she was deliberately trying to kind of work out her own spirituality, and also the way she was deliberately trying to provoke the moral majority, which is on the rise in the mid to late 80s. And she's definitely kind of like, putting it in their face.
Yeah.
But to make her point, right? And then you have the Pope, like, condemning her and all of this in the 80s. But it really was emblematic, right, of these culture wars that were happening at the time, and which I think maybe we're still there or we're there again. But that I kind of see it, the symbol kind of shifts with her, right? That before Madonna, I think we would say, oh, the cross is this summarizing symbol, like people see it and they know what it means, like represents Christianity, identity, this moment in Christian theology, and then I think after her, it gets more murky, right? Less clear, less transparent, more like, what does that mean, right? And more questions. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. This was really intriguing. And I really enjoyed seeing some of those images, having been raised as a Roman Catholic, the first communion dress there, and the young men had special dress as well. But I wanted to ask about broadening this perspective a bit. I remember I was in South Africa years ago on Sundays, and you see literally troops of people along the highway walking to church, and they're dressed in uniforms, all the same color for the women, all the same color for the men. And so these are areas where you don't talk about decline of Christianity. You talk about the incredible growth and the extent to which fashion shapes things internationally outside of the European, North American context.
Yeah.
At one level. But even within the North American context, I was just watching a football game over the weekend, and there were people dressed for a festival from Arizona with more Latino dress, but clearly Christian symbolism in the fashion as well. And so, or here in this area, often go to the Henry Ford Museum, and one of the striking things that you see are the Amish. There are large numbers coming, and they're quite striking. Their fashion is a clear symbol of a statement of who they are. And so I'm wondering if these kinds of things, I know I loved your examples, but if these are kinds of things that you might comment on in terms of alternative ways of viewing this as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, absolutely. I think my focus, yeah, it tends to be, because I was studying the lens of fashion, often through Vogue, and which is then centering Western Europe. And it's really important, especially in fashion, to decenter that, and then to, like, as you're saying, look at other areas globally and what that offers. I think, again, more time, if I had more time and could add more to that list, I think one really interesting area for research is the Christian missions, right? And like you're saying, how that this was always, and when I was in college and divinity school, I took some classes that focused on missionary work. And what always in these books, right, they're talking about, what do they wear? Do they adapt the dress of the country where they're going? What do they expect the converts to wear? Should it be westernized? Should it be indigenous? All these debates that happened on the mission field, and over, and ideas about power, right, that are embedded within those conversations. Like, is everybody dressing the same? Are you wearing uniforms? Are you not allowed to wear this, but you can wear that? So I think that is an area that definitely could be examined more fully. I think uniforms are also religious uniforms. So yeah, you think about the Amish, you think about Mennonites, you think about more like some historic religious communities. I was thinking the other day about the Oneida Perfectionists, the women adopted the bloomer costume, things like that. But I think there you get, right, a sense of one, diminishing the self to privilege the community over self, ideas about unity, belonging, seemingly rejecting fashion to set your own distinctive norms, and a sense of, right, comfort and assurance that other people are dressed like you. So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. But I also think you're right to mention the ways that Western, like European dominated fashion and Western European dominated views of Christianity are definitely being challenged, need to be challenged, are being challenged by different cultures, different, right, in the shift to Christianity to the global South. And really important to think about what that means, right, and the significance of it. So that's where this field, I was telling you all before we started, this is immense, and it needs people to study it at all ages, and for people to right, to be in gathering and collecting data, and it's too much for one person.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gabriele.
Thank you so much. I mean, it was a really intriguing lecture. I mean, my interests are more in antiquity, so I have a lot of questions. No, first of all, I was intrigued by the fact that most of the texts that deal with fashion in ancient sources are not from the Bible. Okay, even though they had a very strong influence on the first Christians. For instance, in the Book of Enoch, there is a very large passage in which fashion is described as one of the secret knowledges of the fallen angels that the fallen angels gave to humankind. So it was a very strong statement, about the fact that fashion, so a call for modesty, but then we have the Testament of 12 Patriarchs, for instance, again. And these are the texts that then were discussed by the church fathers, like Tertullian, for instance, that again has a lot of call for modesty for women based on this apocalyptic text. So the influence of this text has been really very, very, very strong. And I wonder if we have still some echoes of these apocalyptic views. I mean, obviously in the same, I mean, the very idea that the serpent is identified with the devil, which is not in the text, of course, is a consequence of reading this text in light of an apocalyptic point of view. I have also other question. For instance, I wonder, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, we have invitation to carry your cross, okay? To carry your cross. And when it was taken literally, I mean, as something that belonged to fashion. I mean, I grew up in Italy, and everybody in Italy, for as far as I remember, for generations, wore a cross as a necklace. Okay, this was very typical of men, not of women. And then this was passed from father to son, so it's very complicated. Usually golden one that was probably for many people was the only jewel that they had. I mean, because this was very common even in poor families. I mean, that they invested money in this small cross that they wear. And so I wonder when these traditions, if you have an idea when this tradition just started. Now it's spread also in other religions, okay? Because, for instance, in Judaism, I mean, to wear a Star of David, etc. But it's very interesting. And the third observation, third comment is about the use of Christian symbols, again, similar to what Jim said, in a completely secular context. Not certainly as a way to show your faith or your link to Christianity. And I was just wondering, what is the kind of explanation that is given by, I guess, I mean, certainly there have been some kind of attempt to explain the phenomenon from a sociological point of view. I mean, especially young people that are wearing crosses or small crosses or jewels with a clear reference to Christianity, but certainly not with any intention of show their spirituality or their faith. And not also, I think, in terms of simply mocking, I mean, mocking Christianity or simply because it's fashionable. What does it mean that it's fashionable?
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much for that. The first I'm going to leave to you and your expertise, because you know those texts that I don't, but I think it's really interesting to just hear about all of those texts, right? And to think about how some of those same ideas, right, are still being repeated and recycled and utilized. So I think that's important, right? And I think there has been, I believe, some really important work done on the clothing in antiquity, and I know there has that. So I think that's something to really think about. The cross, and so this I think is really interesting. So if you look at, now I wish I had a picture of it, because at museum websites, right, that museums that have collections of jewelry. Jewelry is one of the first, in Christianity, one of the first kind of items to function as an amulet or a talisman. All right. And so they would engrave words on it, like the names of the three kings or there would be words on it that would amplify its spiritual power. And then they also thought that specific gemstones would amplify different spiritual gifts. So I think the example I give in the book where I talk about this is sapphires. I think we're known to like kind of help somebody become closer to God. So bishops often wore rings that had sapphires. And you see this. So it goes I don't know when it switches from clergy to people, like you're mentioning, right? Like that tradition that you noted. I suspect it probably goes back quite a while, right? Because you even get in some of the old these old texts, like concerns about who's wearing who's has they call them paternosters, or like rosary bead, rosary bead, like who has them, what are they made out of, like, oh, they shouldn't be too flashy, they should be simple and modest, like, again, these kinds of ideas. So I think these concerns about use, materials, the context of who's using them and how have been concerns for hundreds of years. But there's some amazing collections like at the V&A in London. I think you probably could find some really good ones at the Met. Like if you type in like cross pendant or, you know, Christian jewelry, kinds, different variations on that, you can find some amazing examples in these jewelry collections. Some of it is just, again, like it's just so huge, this area, right, to think about. I think, and this is related, your question about secular context. I feel like my interpretation in part is that as Christianity becomes more embattled, if you want to say that, or, you know, more decontextualized in the 21st century, I feel like the symbols become more important, right? That's what people hold on to. And if you think about what I think a lot of these designers do is appeal to the Christian past, the ancient past, as a time that was more infused with ideas about the sacred, right? This is an idea that in antiquity or in former times, people were closer to whatever that is, that feeling, that idea, the transcendent, closer than we are now. And so if we can get back there through things, manna, objects with power, perhaps that will help, right? Give me a little good luck today, or this was grandma's cross and she gave it to me. So even if it isn't a religious connection, it might be that familial thread that they know is tied to a religious connection, or was at one point, and maybe is not the same way. But I feel like the objects connect to the past in interesting ways and kind of evoke a time in the past where these objects were infused with more spiritual power.
Yeah, if I may follow,
Please.
I wonder sometimes, is it possible to make a clear distinction between fashion and magic? Okay, because I mean, several times these symbols are used as amulets, has been used for centuries and centuries. So, and forms of, I mean, we call these forms of superstition, but in reality has always been part of our culture, and they have survived in spite also of the decline of religion. I mean, obviously, this boundary in Catholic countries, especially in Southern Europe, is not clear. I mean, because these crosses that were worn by people when then blessed or sparkled with holy water. I mean, and also we were put out in babies to protect them from illness. So there is a lot of I mean, through these symbols, also a lot of magical practices that had originally nothing to do with Christianity, but predates Christianity, have survived. I mean, because some of these rituals were already performed before the birth of Christianity, and continue to be performed using now Christian symbols or amulets that continue to have the same kind of function in the Christian world.
Right. I can see. I see the point you're making. I have a colleague that he studies the word magic and doesn't like me to use it. So, but what I've had to think about is in studying fashion and clothing and kind of grappling with these issues, for me, is the material culture turn in religious studies has helped me kind of wrap my head around that, and thinking about books and articles like Colleen McDaniel's Material Christianity, books like that that have really, and I would say Birgit Meyer's work on materiality and presence and mediation. And think about Christianity is always mediated. Religion is always mediated. It's always mediated through things, through people. And so I think for me, it's taking seriously that material culture component. And then I like what you're saying, like, let's historicize it, let's contextualize it, let's look at what people are doing with it, because I think that tells us something important about how they're defining and living Christian lives. And it may look different than those Orthodox visions of those traditions, but it's the reality on the ground, which is more complex, probably maybe a little more interesting, at least for me, but also just a little messier, right? But that's what makes it fascinating, I think. But for me, the turn to material culture has been a really pivotal moment in my thinking about these things, and that Christianity, religion is always grounded in things. And instead of like the history, especially the history of religious studies and religion in the West, which wants to push the things away and say, oh, it's a spiritual enterprise, it's about belief, it's about right thinking. And I think, but people have to live it without practice, without things. What is it really, right? So that's how I think about it. But I think we're asking the same question, but using different language.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. I'm not seeing any more comments in the chat. So unless anyone else here on screen has further comment or question, I would suggest that we end here for the night after this really inspiring conversation, both in the original presentation, but also this dialogue as we think about the reception of textiles, of clothing in the Christian tradition. So any other questions, comments, thoughts here from our panelists?
Professor Neal, I just want to thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was very thought-provoking, and for me especially, and I'm hoping the participants were that you provoked thought in them too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed it.
So did we.
Very good. We'll end here. Give you another round of applause, virtual round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.